Yep, so Aaron Body told me I'm not very approachable. So I wanted to include a self-deprecating photo. So here's me being a piece of meat in one of my first animal rights actions in 2014, Trafalgar Square, cold morning. Yeah, this was one of my first actions when I was sort of, very idealistic, ambitious animal rights activist. I think I also wanted to include this to, show that this is where I come from. I was willing to do whatever it took, and this was very embarrassing, very uncomfortable thing that I was doing, but I thought it was the most useful thing I could be doing at the time. But I went onwards in my journey as an activist. I founded a vegan and vegetarian society of my University of Winchester. I was making a documentary about fur farming. I was volunteering for animal equality, doing all sorts of things, doing whatever I could to help. And I came across this guy. His name's Jakob Stenzel. He's currently the executive director of Anima International. And at the time, there were some activists from various countries in Europe who wanted to form some kind of coalition or merger of organizations, all with the unified goal of ending animal suffering. And what I didn't have much sort of experience or knowledge, or much common sense, but I had, a lot of determination to fight for animals. So we decided together that I would run the UK branch of Anima, and that's what I've been doing ever since then. So over that time, I've basically spent the last decade, spending sleepless nights, doing undercover investigations on UK chicken farms, very little experience, like taking a lot more risks than I probably should have, crawling through the mud, jumping over fences and scarring my ribs, and, traveling around the country on overnight coaches to mobilize activists and do protests like this, but then also taking out my nose ring and putting on a suit and doing media interviews and creating sort of powerful media stories about chickens. And by this point, I've probably had over 80 meetings with 40 of the biggest food businesses in the UK, retailers, restaurants, chicken producers. And the point of this is that I dedicated the last 10 years of my life to basically just asking companies to use chickens that grow 1 week slower and to just have a little bit more space. And I think there's kind of a interesting question here of why I would spend so much time as this sort of radical activist for something that seems so small, right? That's something I want to talk about. So coming back to Anima International, there's supposed to be a photo there, of a chicken. Just imagine a broiler chicken there. So Anima International, we're an organization that works in 6 countries. And I'm obviously biased, so don't, to be skeptical of what I'm saying, but I think Anima has one of the best track records in the movement in terms of concrete successes for animals. One very cool example is we've been fighting the fur industry for over 10 years in Poland. We've been fighting this campaign for so long. We've done over 100 fur farm investigations, rescued 100 foxes from fur farms. We've been sued by fur farmers. We've had them come to our meetings and filmed us and tried to expose us. We've had, I think, 6 attempts to pass a ban. And it was just at the end of last year, on the 7th attempt, that the president of Poland finally signed into law a ban on fur farming. And Poland is the 2nd largest producer of fur in the world. So I think it's, very cool. And so that's something I think I was expecting you to clap for. But then I wanted to talk about this next thing. So at the same time, same kind of time period, we've been working on so-called welfare campaigns. So one example is that in January, we had the news, after working in Norway for about 9 years, that the Norwegian chicken industry is going to completely phase out fast-growing chickens by the end of next year, otherwise known as Franken chickens. And of course, they're still going to be using these chickens. There's still going to be 70 million of them slaughtered every year and just have a bit more space and grow 1 week slower. And notice how that doesn't sound very exciting, right? Nobody's clapping. But I understand why, right? It doesn't seem as sort of revolutionary and transformational. But I would argue that that win is equally as transformational as the first one. I would say maybe even more effective. But the problem is it doesn't have that kind of transformational feeling that the other kind of campaigns have. And the interesting thing is that in Anima we we have sort of an agnostic approach to the work, so we don't have a specific thing we do. We just look around the world, all the different problems that animals face, and we try to ask ourselves, how can we make the most progress in all these different issues? And it just seems so obvious, working on both fur campaigns and these welfare campaigns, that some issues are just dramatically more tractable than others, right? No matter how hard you try, how many resources you have, you just can't do the same thing that you can for chickens, for example, that you can for fur. And this is because the issues are just so much bigger and the situation is just so bad. So it's time for a few depressing graphs. So when you look at it like this, right, the number of fur animals compared to the other animals is not even going to come up on the graph. And I didn't even do that on purpose. That was just what came out of this. Obviously, there's still 20 million, I think it's 20 million animals on fur farms, and that's 20 million too many, and we should be continuing to try and end the fur industry. But I think when you look at it like this, you can see that it's also kind of makes a bit more sense why we've made so much progress on fur, whereas for the other animals, it's a completely different fight. We have to take a much longer view of this, and we can't just sort of copy and paste the same strategy. I can see that I was laughing, maybe there's no shrimps on here, but I think I would like that. Yeah, that's another discussion. But yeah, so moving on. Yeah, so what's worse is, I think, I'm not sure how many people really think about this, but it's actually like the number of animals is actually going up. And so there's more animals than ever. There's basically like more suffering than ever. And it's very, very, very uncomfortable to think about. But the point here is that despite decades of activism, very high ideals, very high ambitions. First it was veganism, then it was plant-based food system, and now it's sort of ending factory farming is sort of this goal that we have, that we can maybe do it in the near future, next 10, 20 years. But I think, to be honest, I think we're overwhelmingly failing these largest numbers of animals, right? As I said, there are great successes like fur and foie gras and things like that, but for the largest numbers of animals, we're barely making a dent, right? And I'm mentioning this because I think we can do a lot better. I think we have tools that can actually, tools that are available that we can use that can make the progress, go much quicker and have much more impact. We have to change what we're doing and not just keep doing the same things over and over, and also sort of have more different expectations based on what we've learned over the last few decades of what works. So that's what I want to talk about now. So does anyone know who this is? Just say it. Yeah. Woo. So if you don't know, Henry Spear is sort of a legend animal rights activist. So he was a civil rights activist, union organizer, and then I think in like the 70s or 80s, he decided to start dedicating his life to helping animals. And what he noticed was the US movement that was trying to end animal testing was sort of uncoordinated and unrealistic. They had this very general, vague goal of trying to end all animal testing. And obviously like very admirable goal, right? We should end animal testing, but they weren't really getting anywhere. And he had various sort of insights, but one of them was quite simple. It's just that you need to have realistic expectations. Like you need to know that something is achievable. You need to actually be good at that. And one problem we have as activists is that we're so much in our own world that we don't really have a good sense of what is achievable. We don't actually spend that much time, talking to ordinary people. And this is one of his other philosophies, is you should talk to normal people, or normal people all the time. We're not normal, so it's fine. So yes, to have a sort of better sense. And I think in the activist community, I think we're often way too naive about what we can achieve. And I think the track record shows that we're consistently not achieving the goals that we set out to achieve. And I think that's a problem because lives are at stake, right? So we have to make sure we're winning and not just failing. And I think we fail too often. So yeah, using this kind of model of just being, radical in your aims, but also realistic, he had immense success. So he had a pretty simple idea, which is making the problem more manageable. So he would just start putting pressure on the cosmetics companies and doing ads like this. And he, got tons of the biggest cosmetics companies to stop testing on animals, and was more successful than anybody before him in making progress on this issue. So this was used for fur farming and foie gras, this kind of sort of simple model. And it's sort of, I would think about it as sort of combining the radical aims that we have, radical ideals, with a sort of more realistic approach. And the problem is that when you hear realism, right, it can kind of seem like, oh, you're admitting defeat or you're being pessimistic or something. But realistic just means correctly assessing what you can achieve. Like if you were on a deserted island, right, and you uh, you needed to work out how to get home. You had to, your life depended on being correct, right? You have to know how long it will be until somebody comes, or how to build a raft, or how much water you have, right? It wouldn't be admitting defeat. It would just be, because your life depends on it, you have to be right about it. And the problem for us is that we're so far removed from the animals, it's so abstract for us, that I think it's very hard for us to see this, right? It's very hard for us to see what we can actually achieve with this. So, coming to the hens, right? The largest numbers of animals. So taking this model of sort of being both, ambitious and realistic. And this was activists in sort of in the 90s and 2000s were asking, how can we apply this kind of idea to the farmed animals? What can we do for them? And they're coming up with the cage-free ask, right? This is about getting hens out of cages. This was something that was seen as sort of realistic, but achievable and ambitious. And I think that a lot of people in the movement are understandably quite skeptical of these kinds of asks, right? What difference does it actually make? And I remember thinking this myself at one point, is there any difference between those sort of low welfare farms and high welfare farms? And I think that, one of the problems that we have is that I think as human beings, it's very hard to understand what it's like to be a factory farmed chicken, right? Nobody in this room has ever been a factory farmed animal, have no idea what it's like to live in a cage for your entire life, right? It's just something we can't empathize with. It's something that we have no experience with. And I think this can basically make us a bit dismissive of these changes, right? Because we have these, it comes from a good place because we have high ideals. We want things to be even better. But I think that comes at the expense of the animals, and we should always put the animals at the center of what we do, right? It should always be about what's good for them. And I think, if we could ask them what they want, I think the hens would, the first thing that they would tell you is get me out of this cage, right? It would be end this pain, end this suffering. And we obviously can't, ask them. I think if we were to be a hen for a day, everybody in this room were to be a hen in a cage for a day, would come out of it and probably be significantly more motivated to fight to get hens out of cages, right? So I don't think we should let that kind of cognitive error stop us from doing what's best for animals, right? We can't do that, of course, but I think we can get a bit closer. So I want to do that for a few moments. I'll show a few images of hens on farms, just a warning. So let's take a few moments, just imagine you're a few months old and you're a hen like this, and you've been brought onto a caged farm. Now you've been put into this facility and you have no idea why, right? You don't know why you're there. You're never going to see the sunlight. You're never going to feel the fresh air. You're never going to feel grass under your feet. And you just live like this, for a year or more, right? Now imagine walking barefoot on a metal crate every single day of your life, week after week, month after month. And this just goes on and on and on. Your feet get twisted and sore, and of course, nobody's going to come and help you. You're not going to get any treatment, right? You just have to live with the pain. You just have to suffer day in, day out. Imagine you have, A4 sheet of paper in space. It's like living on a crowded subway train for your entire life, right? And if you're a hen, you want to spread your wings. If you're a hen, you're extremely motivated to spread your wings, and you can't do that. Hens also love dust bathing. So this is what dust bathing looks like, right? The birds get into the dirt and they flick it up and it sort of cleans them. It's like a hygiene exercise, and it's also sort of tension relieving. So maybe it's sort of like bathing is for us, but for these hens, it's even more than that. These hens sometimes perform what's called sham dust bathing. So in these cages, sometimes the birds will get onto the metal floor and they'll start mimicking the act of dust bathing, even though there's no dirt there, right? I can't imagine anything more heartbreaking, but it shows you just how much they want to do that, and they can't fucking do it in the cage, right? For me, this is the definition of torture, right? This is hell. And I know you all know this. I'm not trying to make you sad for no reason, but I think it's important for this point, because things can actually be better. So this is a photo of a UK free-range farm, and it's not industry propaganda. This is a photo given to me by a UK undercover investigator. This is a real photo. This is an actual farm in UK, and it's just so obviously better, right? And you can say there's many things wrong with free-range farm, cage-free farm, but the main reason that these birds suffer is because their natural behaviors are restricted. But in a free-range farm, they can have access to sunlight, they can have more space. If there's an aggressive flock mate, they can run away. They have more perches, they have more nests. they can dust bathe, right? They can dust bathe outside, but also the birds that are kept inside can dust bathe because there's dirt in the inside, right? So I think any one of us, if we were going to become one of these hens, we would much rather be a hen on the right farm, right? So there is obviously a difference, and also we can be empirical about it. And there's a research group called the Welfare Footprint Institute, and they calculated, tried to quantify the pain of animals in different systems. And I think it's like at least 1,000 hours per bird prevented from going from a cage system to a cage-free system, right? If we had something like that for humans, like cancer patients have 20% or 50% less pain, right? It would be like obvious, and I think it's because they would be humans and we could understand it. But with farmed animals, we're sort of strangely a bit cold about it, I think, a bit dismissive. But I think if they were with the animals, right, it would be very meaningful for us. So I think that's something that's like worth fighting for, right? Getting millions of hens just having better lives. So I think it's very important for the animals. And the thing is that this, so let's just take that point, right? So this is important, this is useful for the animals. What else can it do? So this cage-free campaign model has been immensely successful. It's been potentially the most successful campaign in animal rights history. So in the UK, just kind of 2 decades, we've gone up to, this is actually a bit outdated now, it's 85% cage-free in a relatively short space of time. And it was only because of activists. A small number of activists who took on this more manageable, targeted objective were able to do something that was never done before. And same in the US, right? You can see how quickly this took off. And also in the US, it's 40% cage-free, but it's like 400 million hens or something like that in the US. So 40% is like 3 times the number of hens in the UK. And also in the UK, 75% of the hens are free range, right? They're not just cage-free, but they're free range. And again, I'm not saying that free range is great or cage-free is great. We've all seen the videos of those farms, and there are many problems there. But the point is that it's significantly better. And together, all of this has freed hundreds of millions of animals, right, from these cages, given hundreds of millions of animals better lives, hundreds of millions of individuals. And I think it's incredible that this has been achieved. So we have a model here that actually works really well for farmed animals. Of course, it's not the end of the story, but it's incredibly effective. And we've never, we haven't come across a tool like this before. So I want to talk a bit about what these campaigns look like. There's probably too much to cover in this talk, but it's sometimes people are hesitant about these campaigns because it's sort of maybe welfare washing or something. But it's not like we're going out there and saying, free range eggs are great, go buy them. It's basically mostly just in the public, just exposing what the problem is. It's just putting pressure on the largest food businesses like retailers and restaurants, and doing undercover investigations like this from Animal Quality, which was a very important investigation which got the largest egg producer, I think, in the UK to go cage-free. There's protests from the Humane League, occupying the headquarters of that company. Hundreds of people in the US doing these sort of protests against McDonald's, and it can even be sort of direct action like this. So I think it's just so much media attention from these campaigns because it's sort of seen as like a justified campaign, right? It's something that everybody can agree on. And rather than just having like a small number of people agreeing with us on our highest ideals, you have basically mainstream public support, which seems extremely important to me for the long term, right? That you have 80, 90% of the public taking part in being active for animals, signing petitions, sending messages to companies, but also joining protests. Most of the actions that I've done, it's been people that aren't vegan activists. They're just people who think obviously we should get hens out of cages or we should improve their lives. I think also something that's really cool about this is that because of these campaigns, you have people in the highest echelons of the largest food businesses in the world basically discussing farmed animals and talking about making policies to improve their lives. Also hiring people to have to work on this. Because of activists, they have to hire people to think about these issues and work on them, right? And now you have that, and you have these billions of eggs in these supply chains basically being changed, being removed, thanks to activists. I think that's one of the things that's very cool about it. I think one of the things that's also underappreciated about this kind of campaign is raising the political status of animals, which also is quite unprecedented. There aren't that many campaigns that can make something like illegal for the 50 million hens in the UK. And this is specifically would not have happened without corporate campaigns, right? You have to move the industry to this point where now it's the exception, so now we can have it soon, if all goes well. The government has committed to ban by 2032, I think so, yeah. By 2032, the ban cages for hens, right? And that's because we've moved the industry to that point. And yeah, none of that would have been possible without these sort of incremental steps to get us there. So obviously I don't really, I don't claim to know what the sort of 100-year sort of plan is for the movement, but it seems obvious to me that, doing things like this, right, just raising the status of animals in society seems so important. And, you see this in many European countries where the standards are sort of the highest. You sort of have this attitude that, yeah, like in our country, like we treat animals well, we treat them better than in other countries. So by making these kinds of like milestones, I think we can sort of change what is actually seen as acceptable and start getting somewhere and start making a dent on these problems. Wayne, some of you will know Wayne, founder of Direct Action Everywhere, or co-founder. So he's known for doing quite radical things like open rescues, and he used to be quite critical of cage-free campaigns. He was even working against them at some point. And he recently changed his mind and wrote a blog about it. It was really cool. And he's basically saying he agrees that, in terms of influence, it's the most successful campaign in animal rights history. I think this is super powerful that we have even people like Wayne, right, saying, agreeing that this is an incredible success, what we've achieved here. It's not the only thing, it's not the end of the story, but it is, in terms of transforming the industry, it's been very successful. And I also really like the last sentence where he says, one would have to be willfully ignorant to miss these developments. And that's kind of the key of this talk for me, is like, I think people are generally supportive of these kinds of things. You kind of agree in theory, but I think still there's not enough people using these tools, right? We have a tool that actually works really well for the largest numbers of animals, and still it feels to me like we're always trying to come up with the next best idea, the next sort of plan that we're going to end everything in sort of the next couple of decades. And as I said, consistently we seem to be failing more than we're succeeding. So I think given the fact that so many lives are at stake, right, we can't afford to abandon these animals, right? It was this long fight. We have to make sure we're getting somewhere and not just kind of consistently risking getting nowhere, which I think too often is what happens. So, yeah, maybe one thing we can say is that just like get rid of this term welfare campaign, right? Because I think it kind of gives you the wrong impression. I would just say it's just about being realistic. It's just about, and it's not about losing your ambition, losing the sort of radical side of the movement. It's just recognizing that this is going to take a very long time, and we have to start getting somewhere. And this is part of a longer term journey, because crucially, nothing is stopping us from further reforms to the industry. It seems obvious to me that this kind of strategy can just keep working, right? You just keep pushing the industry to be better, right? Just to undo this relentless focus on efficiency, right? Where animals are paying the price. We could just keep pushing them, right? We go cage-free, we go free range, and we can go organic, right? We can go further, just keep pushing them. And that seems to be the best one we have so far, and it's very hard for me to imagine that we would find some way to just completely skip all those steps, because it's just such a huge industry and there's so many forces working against us. So, coming back to this graph, I want to talk about, actually I wanted to say one other thing. So we still need to ban cages in the UK. So there's still 8 million hens in cages. We have a commitment from the government, but we still need to make it happen. I'd say if you're interested in helping with this campaign, you can talk to UK Voters for Animals. You put your hands up. Yep. Woo! Yeah, they do awesome work sort of mobilizing grassroots activists to lobby MPs and things like that. That's very important. But there's another issue that I want to talk about, which is, much bigger and much more neglected. So you may have noticed on this graph that most of these are chickens. Chickens primarily raised for meat. And here's another idea. So in the UK, there's 1 billion chickens raised for meat every year. That's 10 times more than all other UK farmed animals combined, right? So I think we have to start prioritizing these broiler chickens, these meat chickens. It's the single greatest source of animal suffering in the UK, and we have to start making progress on it. So some of you might have seen this image. So long story short, we've bred these chickens to grow 4 times faster than they used to. And this obviously comes with horrendous welfare problems for the animals. And in the UK, we still have 95% of the chickens are these Franken chickens, these fast-growing breeds. And yeah, looks like this. You've all seen the videos, right? These birds flapping around, they can't walk, live in their own waste, die of heart attacks, broken bones, lameness. It's this extreme system of suffering for billions of animals, right? It's just unbelievable. And we're basically applying the same model of the cage-free campaigns to chickens raised for meat. We're asking them to use chickens that grow 1 to 2 weeks slower, sometimes longer, depending on the breed, and give them a bit more space. And again, it might not sound like much, right? Nobody's cheering when thinking, oh, that sounds awesome, I can't wait to fight for that, right? But thinking about it, realistically, this being the first step in the long-term fight for undoing this sort of genetic manipulation that we've subjected these animals to, you can kind of see how this fits into the bigger picture. But more importantly, these animals do live much better lives. They suffer from fewer welfare problems because the problem is the genetics and a lack of space, and we can start undoing that. In terms of the longer term, it seems obvious to me that we can just repeat this process, right? We can get to this, and then we get to free range, and then we get to even better. And you might say, well, they're still being eaten, right? They're still being farmed, and they're still suffering in these high welfare systems. But to me, it seems so clear that it's going to be make a lot more sense and be a lot easier to talk about animal rights in the bottom left world than in the top left world. And we can actually get to that point, but we have to start getting from A to B and B to C, and not just thinking we can always jump to the end, because I understand where it comes from. It's sort of a impatience that we have, and that our impatience is our strength, right? We want society to move faster than it's currently moving. But when does that impatience make us naive and unrealistic, right? And we can't afford to just keep failing. We have to start making progress and succeeding for animals. So this is an incredibly ambitious campaign because it significantly raises the cost of chicken. That's what it means, right? To undo intensive farming. But the thing is that it is actually achievable. So as I mentioned, in Norway, we have going to be the first country in the world to stop selling these fast-growing chickens. In the Netherlands, you can't buy fast-growing chickens in the supermarket. In Denmark, where we're working, about half of the industry is using these slower-growing chickens. In Germany, all the major supermarkets are committed to doing this. In the UK, Waitrose made the transition last year. M&S is making the transition as we speak. So we know it can be done, but it's very, very hard. So we and the other UK groups like Humane League and Compassionate World Farming and RSPCA have been trying very hard to get the other UK companies to follow, the other UK retailers, to follow the likes of M&S and Waitrose. Yeah, tons of pressure, meetings, it's been campaigns going on for years. And we came to a compromise a couple of years ago. So we've now got about at least 60% of the UK chicken industry using the better space requirements. So that's about 500 million chickens every year who have these improved lives, which I think is pretty cool. But it's obviously not the end of the story because they're still using the fast-growing chickens. And that's the next task. That is the task ahead of us now in the UK. I think it's the most important campaign by far in the UK. And we have to start getting the industry to stop using these fast-growing chickens. So this is sort of coming to the last part of the talk. Yeah, the big question is, like, how do we start doing that? How do we get companies to follow M&S and Waitrose, right? How do we start undoing this extreme system of suffering? Very ambitious ask. We've been working on this for many years. We've been in dialogue for companies for many years, and unfortunately there is very low appetite from companies to do this because it is so expensive. And there is very little momentum at the moment. And just like with the strategy I mentioned of sort of taking things step by step, with these campaigns you also need to take things step by step. You have to start working up and getting momentum. You can't just sort of go after the biggest companies straight away, no matter how much we might want to. So we have settled on a particular company for a public accountability campaign that we're going to be running. I'll just give you a very brief context. In the UK, we had quite a lot of companies that are committed to follow M&S and Waitrose. And you may have seen that a few weeks ago, many companies like KFC and Nando's publicly withdrew from this commitment. And the problem is that, very few companies have actually followed through on the breed requirement of this. So still have, very few companies that have started to phase out these fast-growing chickens. And after a lot of work and strategic planning, we've decided that we're going to do a accountability campaign about Pret. So it might be surprising, but Pret was one of the companies that committed. And 8 years ago, they were one of the first companies to commit in the UK. And 8 years later, they've made 0% progress on getting rid of Franken chickens. Now, Pret is one of those companies that sort of built its brand on doing the right thing and sustainability and ethics. So we think they should be one of the first companies leading this. They should be the next step in this fight. So we've been talking to them for 2 years, and we haven't managed to make any progress. We always try to have dialogue first with companies. We're still in dialogue with many of these companies, but we now need to escalate to this public campaign. We are going all in on this campaign. So we have a budget of £1 million to get Pret to start implementing this commitment. Sometimes these campaigns can take weeks, sometimes months, sometimes even years. And yeah, we'll try to do it as fast as we can, of course, but we'll be in it for the long haul if we need to be. Here's some of the campaigns team. You can come and talk to me, Ola, and Paul about it. What are we going to be doing? So it's going to be launching about a couple months publicly, and we're going to have an initial focus on London. So we're going to be doing hundreds of actions at Pret stores in London. Going to be doing some quite interesting and engaging tactics that I think we haven't seen before, trying some things out. I think it's going to be quite fun and exciting, and I think even just for that, I think it'll be a very cool learning experience for us and for you if you wanted to get involved. Going to be doing large-scale outreach. Here's a few mock-ups of the kind of things we're looking to do. It's going to be seen by millions of people. Here's Paul in an AI-generated video looking kind of weird. We're also doing looking at doing some art installations. And one interesting thing about this is we think it's a very good opportunity to raise awareness about factory farmed chickens because, as I said, Pret is a company that you don't expect to be doing this. So it's even Pret is selling Franken chickens, right? It makes it kind of more interesting, public, surprising debate that we can have to start making more progress on this issue. So yeah, I'm very biased, but I think getting involved in this campaign in the UK is one of the most impactful things you could do this year. And I strongly believe that. I think this incremental approach is the best one we have to make progress for the largest numbers of farmed animals. I think we have to start heavily prioritizing chickens raised for meat. As I said, I think Pret is the key next step in this. We need to get Pret to start getting those other companies like KFC and Nando's. We have to work up to it, and Pret is the necessary first step. We need hundreds of people to take part in this campaign. We have Paul and Ola with the sign-up forms. We will not let you leave until you sign up. We're going to do like a webinar in a couple weeks or something, but you can just sign up and get on the WhatsApp group and get more information about it, and yeah, we'll let you know what's going on. But it's going to be cool. So just to finish the talk, I've dedicated, as I said earlier, I've dedicated the last 10 years of my life to helping chickens like her who have bred to grow so fast she can't even walk. I'm ready to dedicate the next 10 years, next 50 years, the rest of my life just for this campaign because I think it's so important, and I would really, really want you to join us on that so we can create a world like this. This is a broiler that we rescued in Poland, I think. Take a few weeks after coming out of the farm, walking on the grass, being happy and free for the first time in their life. And yeah, I think this campaign is one of the ways we can get to a world like this where animals can be free and happy. Thank you. And there's a QR code here so you can get more information.